2, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Progress.
Good morning. Welcome to the August 6, 2026 Architecture Review Board meeting. Shall we have roll call, please?
Yeah. Chair Adcock.
Here.
Vice Chair Rosenberg.
Present.
Board Member Chen.
Present.
Board Member Jojar.
Present.
Board Member Hirsch. For the record, we have quorum.
Thank you. Do we have any changes to the agenda, additions or deletions?
No changes planned for today.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to public comment, and this is time for anyone in the chamber who wishes to speak on an item that is not on the agenda. Anyone wishing to speak over Zoom, you'll have time at the end of this meeting. Or do we have any comment cards?
The chair have not received any public comment cards for public comment.
Thank you. Then we move on to city official reports.
All right. Well, good morning and welcome to our August meeting. Kind of hard to believe that we're already at the start of fall, almost at the end of summer. I do have a few projects here that recently came in. So those are 4103 Old Trace Road. So that's for a major architectural review and tentative map to subdivide a property and develop 16 total units. And we have another project at the Stanford Shopping Mall for a facade upgrade of the existing Peloton store for a relocation of Victoria's Secret. And we have at our next meeting 2 projected projects, one of those being the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space, their Skyline Field Office, as well as 3997 Fabian Way for an early review of the streamlined housing for 273 units. And as always, if there's any planned absences, please direct that to staff's attention. I have the remaining meetings of 2026 listed on the screen here. And with that, I can entertain any further questions. And I do want to introduce our summer intern, Manal Zia, who's with us today.
Welcome. I do have one planned absence, which is the very last meeting at the end of this year. Anybody else have any others to note today?
No, I don't have any planned absent, but I do have a question on the upcoming project. So I know last time during the work plan, we talked about like the preview. So for the upcoming 2 projects, one named preliminary review, the other is early review. Is there a specific difference between these 2, or are they in different phases? One is earlier than the other, or they're the same?
Right. The name might be a misnomer, but a prelim is not seeking, say, like a formal recommendation. And an early review would be getting it before the board and seeking for a recommendation to perhaps, say, continue to a further meeting, just to get some of that feedback early in the review process.
Thank you.
Any other?
I'm trying to. Was the question about the Trace building that we already reviewed? Is that what you were thinking about?
No, I'm talking about packet page 5 for the next meeting, not the not the recently submitted project, but the 2 projects listed for our next meeting.
Okay. But is there some clarification about this the meeting this next meeting agenda? It's a project which the same site as a project which we reviewed.
Yes, that is correct. The property owner applicant, if you will, has submitted some a revised scope, which prompted a new application. And we do have the project planner here with us for that item. So I can defer to them for any specifics. But
okay, just for clarity at this moment. Thank you.
Any other questions? No. I just want to get just further clarification. So for the Skyline Boulevard for next time, that just recently came in and it's a very preliminary, informative kind of thing, right?
Correct.
Versus the Fabian Way one. Has that Fabian one, because it's noted as early review, has staff completed the review or is it still?
Well, staff will complete the review before the meeting packet
Okay.
is prepared. But yes, that would be it's at a further stage, if you will, than the Skyline Boulevard project. So
All right, thank you.
Again, on the Fabian Way, we long ago saw a project, but is that the same site?
I believe so. Yes.
Might even predate you.
I think it may.
All right, then shall we move on to the next agenda item, which is recommendation on process and design standards for Tier 2 and Tier 3 wireless communication facilities in the public right-of-way. SECO status not a project. Staff recommendation to the board is to develop new review criteria and process to support more efficient review of future Tier 2 and Tier 3 wireless communication facilities in the public right-of-way using previous objective standards as a foundation, which is in our packet, and recommend adoption of the proposed review criteria and process by the city council. So, Nishita, you have a presentation for us?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, ARB. I will be presenting the wireless review criteria and process. Just a quick overview. We did meet for a study session on July 16th to get this conversation started. This discussion is to request a formal recommendation on the review process and criteria. Next slide. As a quick overview, this is a follow-up to the May 19th, 2025 City Council hearing, where Council's motion included 3 distinct next steps for staff as well as ARB, including directing ARB to develop a new set of objective or subjective standards for review of wireless applications in the public right-of-way, referring projects to the Planning and Transportation Commission if and when needed, and directing staff to engage a consultant to study the technical feasibility of placing cell towers at a 100-foot setback from residential structures and a 1,500-foot setback from schools and daycares. Due to staffing constraints and housing priorities, we did not have a chance to hire on the consultant. However, we did have a chance to connect with the data team here at the city after the study session on July 16th. And further in the presentation, I will discuss some of the information that was provided by them. Next slide. Once again, for a quick overview on the study session and the ad hoc committee review. On July 16th, we held a ARB study session to have a preliminary conversation on Tier 2 and Tier 3 wireless communication facilities and the public right-of-way, how we would like to review them moving forward and what the process would be. On July 21st, 2026, ARB ad hoc committee consisting of Chair Adcock and Board Member Hirsch met to review the standards that were already in place in the past and provided a red line document with suggested edits, which has been provided in attachment A of the packet. Chair Adcock requested some additional items be discussed as a part of the presentation, so I'll talk about that further in the presentation. Although we don't have a definition of immediately adjacent in our code, under Palo Alto Municipal Code 1877080, we do have a definition of adjacent properties, which comes from the noticing requirements for certain projects. And this is described as the properties, those that share a common boundary with the subject property, the property or properties located directly across the street, and the next property is located diagonally across the street from the subject property. We also don't have a definition of standard designs. However, the objective standards refer to the standard designs are those that follow the objective design standards criteria. the city relies on General Order 95 National Electric Safety Code and other acceptable utility practices to arrange equipment and attachments to existing or new poles. And there's no pre-approved designs offered by the city for what a standard design would be. Next slide. One of the questions that was raised during the in the red line document was the feasibility of undergrounding vaults to house radio equipment. This response and the responses down the line, we did consult with representatives of AT&T just to get some understanding of what is typically provided during these plans and during these review processes. And they were able to confirm that undergrounding active radio equipment is generally treated as unfeasible, since radios are designed to be located closer to the antennas for better signal performance. So when you move them underground, that signal can be weakened. Modern radios also rely on open air convection cooling, and if you put them underground, that cooling system can be compromised. The underground walls also increase risk of water intrusion or moisture, which can also damage the equipment. So undergrounding may be appropriate for passive elements like fiber or power conduit, but may not be as appropriate for radio units. Next slide. One of the other things that were brought up in the red line document was the feasibility of decreasing the diameter of the antenna and shroud to be less than 15 inches. Once again, one of the AT&T representatives did mention that the antenna diameter is driven by the equipment that's placed inside of it, and it's not necessarily a design preference. A smaller antenna cap may result in the use of multiple antennas or additional facilities to make up for any coverage loss. And combining low band and higher capacity bands into one antenna can require a diameter of up to 16 inches. Next slide. In terms of antenna placement of radios on wood utility poles, lowering the antenna placement can mean that the coverage that they're looking to provide may not be met. Mid-pole placement reduces the antenna's effectiveness, and reduced coverage may make it harder to identify to meet the identified service gap. And then antenna height on wood poles should generally be evaluated in relation to the carrier's coverage objectives. So it should be like more of a case-by-case or application basis. Next slide. And antenna placement on metal streetlight poles are also a bit challenging when they're lowered, because the height of these poles generally in Palo Alto range between 20 to 25 feet. So there's minimum kind of vertical separation to provide these, to actually install this equipment and also make it as a camouflage element from the pedestrian right-of-way. The antenna height is important for maintaining compliance with federal radio frequency exposure limits. There are certain thresholds that that applicants have to meet, and as they get lower, the exposure to the general population, which is the people who are walking on the sidewalks, can potentially increase. And taller decorative poles, which are typically around 30 feet tall, may allow for a more design flexibility. So generally, again, antenna placement shall be evaluated case by case based on pole height, coverage need, and RF exposure analysis. Next slide. One of the other questions that was brought up was if power usage by each of these wireless facilities was being metered separately, and whether what the general location of these meters is on these projects. The utilities team did provide a response saying that the city does not require a physical meter for such installations, and the overall footprint is also generally reduced because of that. The energy usage is billed through the city's unmetered electric rates for each of these facilities, and the city also does not have or accept underground or subsurface electric metering. Next slide. So before the objective standards went into place in 2019, which were then repealed in 2025, there was an analysis done by staff on the minimum distance or a distance threshold that was being discussed at the 100-foot mark from residential structures, from the residential zone of exclusion, which is provided in the objective standards checklist, and also a 300-foot distance from schools. So we did have a chance to review this in a bit more detail, and the way this reads is essentially from the distance measured on the left side in the first column, the percentages have been identified of how many or what percentage of wood utility poles specifically would be excluded if we were to set those setbacks. So essentially at a, let's say 30-foot distance from a residential building, we're excluding about 47% of wood utility poles from having wireless equipment. And then the same, if we're measuring that distance at 100 feet, it would be about 98% of the wood utility poles that would be excluded. So even though we didn't have a chance to look at the 300 or the 1,500-foot setbacks, City Council had previously requested, even at 100 feet, the number of wood utility poles being excluded is over and beyond what may be feasible in the city. Next slide. And this is just another version, a chart version of the same data. This one just stops at 35 feet as opposed to 100. And as you can see here, the exclusion zone for these from building setbacks, for schools, and for the for residential structures, all of which are over 70% of over 70% of the poles would be excluded if a 35-foot setback was maintained. Next slide. At this time, staff recommends ARB to develop a new review criteria and process as revised in Attachment A, which is the red line document that was provided to us, and forward this to Planning and Transportation Commission for consideration and recommendation to City Council. Thank you for your time. I also want to just note that we do have representatives of the of AT&T and also the city utility team who may be able to answer any specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for staff?
At the moment, the drawings that we received here today were approved by the city at some point.
That's correct. The drawings that were provided were of streetlight poles and one wood utility pole wireless installations that were approved between the years of 2017 and 2020.
This is really the first time that we're looking at some of the details of the actual elements that are part of this approval process.
The sample ones that were provided, this is the first time that we're looking at them. Previously, we had one Tier 2 application that had come for review in October of 2025.
Right. So the city so far has not approved the actual shape and look of these items, and is this a part of what you're requesting today?
There's no formal application being requested for approval. So far, city has only reviewed one public right-of-way project that was in October of 2025. This specific conversation and analysis right now is more to look at the review framework that we would like to establish moving forward for Tier 2 and Tier 3 wireless applications in the public right-of-way.
So the items that are shown here are a part of our responsibility today. Is that correct?
No, they are not.
They are not.
They are just provided as illustrations of the types of details that are provided with this type of application. You are not reviewing the plans, but if they help you better understand the types of height and size of some representative antenna, that is their purpose, to help you have that context, but you are not reviewing those plans, just the written document.
I mean, part of our responsibility is the look of the items in the street and the buildings, et cetera, that we review. So is there a time when we would be reviewing that, or has that already been approved by staff?
We have reviewed any project that comes in for wireless, we do review them, but we haven't formally had any applications except for the one in 2025.
And if I may, just those items, the plans that were sent in, those range from projects back in 2017 to
In 2020.
2020. So those are effectively, say, like projects that have gone through either staff review and then has either been built and existing infrastructure of the city. So I really think the conversation for today and the discussion is geared towards what level of criteria and review process we would like to see in these standards. And if the board really wants to hone in on, say, the process, what projects would come before your review versus staff's review. So really making that distinction there between what's objective that can be handled at the staff level versus what would be what's highlighted in the staff report. If there's a deviation from those standards, that would come to the architecture review board. So just requesting that.
I mean, does everybody agree with this process here?
Yeah, I would say just to clarify, the purpose for us today is to develop the framework when future projects come to us. And these examples kind of help us understand what kind of projects were previously submitted and likely similar ones would be submitted in the future, right? And if I understand correctly, these that were in the 27 to 2020 range were staff reviewed, and it was before the previous objective standards
That's
were
correct.
set.
Yep.
And at the time, there was no ARB review. It was all staff review, correct, for these projects?
Correct.
So what I would like to suggest, unless there are more questions.
Oh, yeah, I do have one more question. So thank you so much for putting all these examples. It really help us to understand what's going on. And I'm just curious. So during the like say the past decade, is there any underground application come up, or there is just no because of the infeasibilities that you just mentioned?
Staff isn't aware of any applications that have come in for undergrounding. They are evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So we would have to go back case by case to see if there was any specific condition where that may have been deemed feasible. But at this time, we're not aware of any undergrounded equipment.
And for the feasibility study, have you just checked with AT&T or all three major providers?
Just with AT&T.
Okay, thank you.
I do have one question about the distances that you noted for the wood poles, the 100 feet. I'm curious why that study was only wood poles, or are wood poles pretty much ubiquitous around the city? If you measure from wood poles, you're kind of measuring from anything. Is that why?
So when the analysis was completed, the data points that we had were only for electric wood utility poles. They were already mapped out, and we just did the analysis using those existing poles. We also do have very preliminary data on streetlight poles having wireless infrastructure, but it isn't as robust. So we just used the wood utility poles as a good example to start the analysis with. And again, this is a few years outdated, like it was completed in 2019. So at this time, we haven't had any effort to do another analysis to look at streetlight poles and any new infrastructure that may have been added on wood utility poles.
And those were for all building types, not residential, not daycare and schools.
They were from distances to all buildings. That's correct. It's not residential structures. We don't have a way to exclude all residential because we don't have the uses documented in that table. So it's hard to identify what the uses of those structures. But I think the general analysis was done for all structures in the city. But the schools and the residential zone of exclusion, that was very specific for residential zones and school facilities.
Any other questions?
Yeah, okay, good. I'll remember that now. As noting in the documents, the drawings, that is, there's even some replacement poles moved from one area to another close by. And then it seems that even in the downtown, in the not downtown areas, you reverted to, or the committee, the companies have determined that they would use a traditional pole in some of these locations versus just a straight up metal pole. Is there some substitution in the look of these poles within neighborhoods? Yes?
So there we do have criteria for downtown and along El Camino Real, like specific guidelines on design guidelines on how these poles should look. They are specifically for streetlight poles. A lot of the poles that you're looking at in your examples, they were before that criteria went into effect. So the designs that you're seeing in the plans are before the design guidelines were in effect. Hence, the designs may not align with the streetlight guide that has the design standards for those streetlight poles.
That are not in the specific areas you're mentioning here now. In other words, the area where there will be other poles of the same nature. Camino Real, those poles will all look the same. Is that correct?
The existing poles were not swapped out. So anytime there's any new project coming in, if it does require a replacement pole, now that the streetlight design guidelines are in effect, if they are replacing it, they replace it based on the standards that's set by the guidelines. But any existing poles will remain. So there is a possibility that there's an inconsistency in how the streetlights appear.
So in areas, let's say Middlefield Avenue, that far away, does that have a guideline for it that would include the traditional looking poles that are part of the packet here?
So the street style guide, the downtown area actually extends out a little bit further, almost like a flagpole along Middlefield. And I can pull that up, map up in a second to kind of present it here. But it isn't just concentrated in what we identify as the downtown neighborhood.
It's consistent along
Correct.
Middlefield.
Along only Middlefield, I believe, but I can look at the map in a second.
Thank you. That's good.
But there are parts of town that have more detailed, more decorative style now required for those new ones so that they transition over time as they need to be replaced. There are other areas that just have the standard requirements that we've used in the past.
Okay. Of course, on those poles, the look of the items that are part of the 5G, they're different looks than the actual pole itself. You know.
And then just for the record, we pulled up that street guideline standard for that map.
So the area in green, if you see, there's like a little segment on Middlefield that extends outward from the downtown area. That's also where the downtown guidelines would apply. The downtown streetlight design guidelines would apply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So only in that area. So any other area along Middlefield, for example, it would be a change.
Correct. They wouldn't follow the streetlight design guidelines.
So I'm looking at, let's say, 2. 2 is an area that includes a piece of Middlefield.
That's correct, but that's part of California Avenue, California Park design guidelines. It's a very small segment. You're right.
If I may jump in, there are these 3 design guideline standards, But anywhere else too, there are streetlights and there's a standard, I guess previously approved streetlights for any other street too, right? So if
Correct.
a pole had to be replaced, it would be match existing from that street if it doesn't fall within these three zones.
Correct, just not as decorative as
Right.
these examples.
As noted on the map special for these three areas.
So in those areas that have wood poles, for example, you mentioned the height of the pole about 30 feet. Is that correct?
That's an approximation, but yes, 30 feet approximately.
I believe that there's, in my neighborhood, the poles are probably a bit higher than that. You want to sort of correct that relative to wood poles?
I can take a look at the data points to see what the average height of these poles would be. There are some older utility poles that are taller than others, and then some of the replacement poles are between 30 to 35 feet. We have also seen examples that are about 40, 45 feet, but I'm not sure if they're like maybe neighborhood specific or maybe they were just older poles. We also have not seen any new wood utility pole replacements recently, and especially through like a wireless project. So the data points might not be the most accurate.
Have you asked the question, what happens if some of these neighborhoods do not have in-grounding for the whole system, and not these particular items which are on poles, and the neighborhood is going to turn into metal poles at some point. How do you deal with that? Because the metal poles will be of different heights.
In relation to the wireless facilities
Yes, of
or
course.
lights in general? Okay.
No, the lights are, they are either used on the metal poles in just the way they are presently in the neighborhood. So it has nothing to do basically with the lights, which are staying the same. I'm
Right.
talking about how do you transition between who takes a responsibility, let's say, if there's a decision to change a neighborhood into metal poles
I think we could ask
and
our
undergrounding.
Yeah, I think we could ask our representative from utilities if we have them, but in general,
Yeah.
there is an agreement when these antenna are being put on city property and city facilities. The general thing that I would say is it's usually an agreement that they are responsible for relocating their equipment if the pole needs to be replaced. Say whether it's kind of a broader effort that's being conducted by the city, or say somebody ran into the pole and it was damaged and it needed to be replaced. There are usually agreements that cover that. I don't know if we've got somebody from utilities who might be able to add to that.
Yes, we do.
Good morning, Terry Crowley, Chief Operating Officer for the utilities. So to speak to a few of those questions, so yes, we do change out poles. The choice between a metal pole or a wood pole would be decided at the time of design and what's most economical. In putting a place in there, I think just to provide a little bit of clarification on the pole height. So 30 to 35 foot poles, my recollection of reading the standard there is that's the intent for a pole that does not have electric facilities on there. So secondary or primary high voltage wires on it. When we do have secondary and high voltage wires, those poles will be taller. Some could reach as much as the total pole length would reach 60 to 65 feet, and there's 10% of that pole plus 2 feet is in the ground subsurface, so it doesn't reach a total height of that. But there would be some areas where there would be the need for General Order 95, National Electric Safety Code, generally accepted utility practices to have a taller pole to maintain space between the attaching utilities.
Thank you. That's great. But you could stay up if you want. There might be other technical questions. It seems strange to me. I want to sort of be upfront about this one. It seems strange to me that we're looking at these and approving something that is called design standards. And yet the items on the pole are not something we've ever looked at before. I don't think it's ever come up before, the actual units that are going to be installed on the pole.
Just to clarify, David, these were provided to us at our request to get a sense of previously installed projects, right? And at the time, I definitely wasn't on the board, but it was not part of ARB review is what I understand at the time these were reviewed. But these are shared with us as examples because we had a lot of questions of what do these look like? What, the previous other examples when we were reviewing this 3 weeks ago. So I don't think we should shoot the messenger for sending us more examples to look at.
And I can provide a little more context. There used to be wireless facilities that did come to the ARB for review. And having designs similar to this, whether it was on a pole or something that was located on private property. I remember as a WE planner coming and discussing some antennas that were on the back of a cross above a church, for example. So we've got a number of facilities throughout the city, and depending on the scope of the project and what the rules and process were at that time, sometimes they did come to a public hearing, sometimes they were reviewed at staff level. So similar with our design guidelines for buildings, trying to get these in place, even if we don't have a project in front of us, helps us consider the process, make sure that we are meeting the timelines required by federal law, and having some standards to ensure that they are consistent with the way we want our community to look. So, thank you.
Anybody else have questions?
It may be helpful to hear from the members of the public who are here to speak, since I know we have at least one representative from AT&T who can provide some additional context.
I'd say yes. Shall we close questions and go to comments then? Thank you. Yes, please. Members of the public, do we have comment cards or do we?
Through the chair, I've not received any public comment cards. If there's members of the public that want to speak on this item, they can fill out a card. And you have a mark on, yeah.
So we have two individuals from representatives from AT&T. One is here in person, another one is attending via Zoom.
And so we can invite Mark, who's online, if you'd like to share any thoughts based on the discussion or other information you'd like to share with the ARB. And then we could go to the person in chambers.
Please state and spell your name, and so we'll start with 3 minutes for your comments.
Is that for me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, great. Hi, Mark Grabish, MARC, GRABISCH. Sorry that I can't be there in person this time, but I am a representative from AT&T and I manage the small cell program. I do appreciate the time that you are taking to develop guidelines and standards. Having objective standards is really helpful for us as far as understanding what the city is looking for in terms of designs that we can submit and plan for. A lot goes into the applications and the structural analysis in order to make sure we have all that right. And it's very difficult if we're trying to rework things because of a change in how the city would prefer that equipment to be configured. The original sites that we built for small cell in the city of Palo Alto did actually go through Architectural Review Board. Those are the ones that are downtown, and we replaced the existing standard streetlight with the more decorative style streetlight. During that Architectural Review Board process, even then it was, it seemed at the time the review board members could not come to an agreement whether they preferred the radios to be vertically stacked along the pole or mounted above the luminaire arm in a single shroud. So we ended up having to change the design a few times in order to try to anticipate what was ultimately going to be approved, and that really lengthened the timelines for getting those sites deployed to well over a year, way beyond the shot clock timeframe. So certainly getting adopting standards that we can understand how to anticipate and have a successful application proceed within the shot clock timeframes would be very appreciative. And I'm here to answer any questions that you may have on the design options that we have. Last time at the last ARB, I presented some of the solutions that we could propose that we feel met with the previous objective standards, also took into account the review that we obtained during the October Architectural Review Board hearing, and really are trying to ensure that we can balance the needs of providing much needed service to the community, as well as meeting the aesthetics and standards that the city would like to adhere to. So really willing to work with you and try to come up with the best solutions possible that balance time and investment in the city as well. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tasha S.
I just wanted to make sure I had a speaker card. My name is Tasha Stack. I am here as a representative to AT&T, working on behalf of Mark Grabish. If there are any questions that I may answer about potential future upcoming applications, I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, I believe Mark has addressed most of the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you.
And through the chair, I have no other requests to speak.
Thank you. All right. So I suggest we move on to kind of diving a little deeper into the objective standards. So what we, when David and I met and sent the markups that are here, we categorized some items in the previous objective standards as, we agree or have no comment, but it's not part of our purview. So I would like to suggest that we skip through those. We can come back to them or go through and mark any that anybody else on the board still want to address. But I've marked about 7 items that I would like to, that I feel like is part of ARB's purview, and we've made notes on them, and I'd like to go over those and have everybody's agreement on those. That sound good? Great, thank you. All right, so I'm on packet page 11. Nishida, is it possible to pull those up on the screen?
Yes, I'll pull it up.
Thank you. Thank you. So the items on this packet, page 11, we've marked them all as not our purview. If anybody has any questions on the residential zone of exclusion portion, we can ask questions.
No, not for the residential zone, but the previous ones. Shall we include public and private schools instead of just for public school?
That's a good point. The second, public school boundary shall not be placed within 600 feet of parcel containing public school. So if we were to, I guess more of a city process question, if a private school is, in the city, and there's kind of a permitting process to have the private, so you would have a record of all public and private schools in some format. So if we added private, you could have it.
Yes, we would note the locations of those.
I have one more question on that note. I know that there's sometimes daycare centers or
preschools that are run out of people's homes, things like that. So are those noted by the city as well?
Correct. So that would be, say, like a different use type. So I guess to put the question back to the board, provide some clarity as to what you would like to see on the whether it's a private school, also including those daycare centers or excluding those. So, but the city would have record of those facilities.
I just want to jump in before, I did have a chance to discuss with the data team what we already have mapped out, and they did mention that home daycares are a bit harder to map, since they don't always have those state licensed, I guess, individuals and on board. So anytime there's a state, licensed establishment, that will be in our records. I think that's kind of the distinction that they had made for us, if that's helpful.
Exactly the information I was trying to get to. Okay.
Do you want to include?
I mean, I think anything around kids is probably a good idea, but it's one of those that, again, we will be relying, I mean, with the caveat that we will be relying on the records we have. If something's being run under the table or something, we won't know about that. And that seems like a responsibility for them to take up. So, but I think as much as we can do to protect kiddos, that's probably a good idea.
Can we note it as a public and private schools and childcare and licensed childcare facilities? And I do want to note that we are not opining on the 600 feet or the 300 feet distance or any of the distances, since we don't feel like that is our expertise to say one way or the other. That everybody agree with that?
May I ask you a question? What's the reason for why you want to expand the scope of this paragraph to include other facilities?
Just the public school boundary, because why should we be cautious around public school kids, but not private school kids? Right. So any kids, right? Any school facility should be noted and, treated with a little bit of respect. Whether it's public or private. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that would be the reason for just making sure that we're covering the bases to protect the kids, or at least keep them, in mind as these things are being thought through.
So are you saying that these cell phone towers are potentially harmful?
There's a reason that we wouldn't want to place it on top of the roofs of residential houses, right? Do we know what it is? Are we experts in it? No. Now, out of an overabundance of caution, I would say that we should be a little bit more careful around kids. But yeah, that's one of the questions that does come up, is whether or not they are actually harmful. And we just don't have the answers for that, nor are we experts on that front.
Yeah, so I think for that reason, like, I would be cautious around us making a change to this, because it would, we are lay people.
But we already have a public school boundary. We're just defining it as public and private. That's it, right? Because if we're protecting one school, why would we not protect the other?
And
right? Why is it that the public school kids get this sort of zone around them when the private school kids don't?
And if I may
Please.
jump in, I think the note from the ad hoc was correct, that, the ARB is really intended to be focused on the aesthetics.
Understood.
If it is the consensus of the ARB that you would like to suggest this be considered for public and private schools, that's fine, but we do want to be cautious that we're not going beyond that aesthetic.
Exactly. And understanding that we are not the experts here, but at the same time, there is already a note and an exception for being a little bit more cautious for whatever reason around a school, right? Why would we separate out public school kids from private school kids?
I think I want to suggest that there are items here, like this objective standard is no longer in effect. So what we're doing today is recommending the future objective standards. And then I want to block out the items that we are making, whether it's this or something else, that we're making suggestions on areas that are not part of our purview, whether it's planning commission or the city council. It's recommendations to the city council that if private schools are noted in any way, we would recommend that if public schools are noted, then we recommend that private schools and licensed childcare facilities are also included in that
Exactly.
grouping. But whether this whole item stays in the subjective standards or not I feel like is not for us to say. Does that make
I mean,
sense?
I think that we can make the recommendation that, so part of our goal is saying, okay, which things should just get green stamped, good to go?
Right.
And which one should have a second look? And I think anytime you're talking about kids or location proximity to kids, having a second look is not a harmful thing.
Mhm.
So that's my argument for it is I'm like, the technology can change over time, right? We don't know about hazards and things like that. All I'm saying is that I think that at any point you have any facilities being installed near kids, it's worth a second look. That's my point. So that's why I would say public and private, and that's why I would keep the school boundary in. I mean, our goal here is to say which ones need a second look. If they're putting in something on a street light pole in, Page Mill Road where it's a bunch of industrial complexes, that's fine. There's not a lot of activity close to that. There's not a lot of people around. There's not a lot of people it's going to visually impact or physically impact. But when you're dealing with schools, anytime there's kids, it's worth a second look. That's sort of my
Second look,
standard.
I mean, second look, I would agree with,
Mhm.
but second look can also include removing this restriction for any school or reducing the feet from 600 to 200 or 100 because of technological progress or scientific research that has shown X, Y, Z. So I think this is more like yeah. So I think second look, yes, but I don't think we should limit the second look to potentially making this more restrictive than what it is. Like,
But why would you separate out a public school versus a private school?
I think it's a good point. Second look, but maybe public schools could also be removed.
Right.
I don't know.
So I think we should note that city council to review this item, whether this item stays in the standard or not. And if it does, we recommend private schools and licensed childcare facilities are included in whatever that distance is also decided. That makes sense.
I'm good with that.
Okay. All right, so then the next item about the residential zone exclusion. That one, I just want, like, I don't know if everybody saw the diagram that was here. I forget what packet page. This one is just our opinion that this, the center 50% being excluded, it needs, yeah, there we go. So, no wireless facility shall be placed within the public right of way in the area between the street center and the center 50% of immediately adjacent parcel in front. I would want to recommend that in this one, there's, this is more of a case by case. This can be fine as a guideline, but every property, where their driveway is, entrances is going to be different. So excluding the middle 50%, it seems slightly arbitrary to me. That could be right where your front door is, or to the side or whatever that might be. So this one, again, it's, I'm saying not our purview, but this seems subjective. Anybody else want to add anything to this?
Seemed to me that the intention here was to try to put the locations that are possible at a property line itself. Maybe we could have a discussion about that, whether that language would be included in areas that are preferred. Property line between properties.
I mean, I see the intent of this. I think it's a reasonable intent to say, you wouldn't want a street light pole right in front of the center front door of your house. So in theory, this is trying to get them sort of closer to those property lines, but maybe one of the houses, excuse me, maybe one of the houses has one of those, old timey side driveways that just runs down the entire edge of the property, and the other one doesn't, has a little bit more wiggle room. So I think that's just allowing for some flexibility, but really the intent of this seems to be to try and get them as close to like between properties as possible, and thus also spacing them as far from houses as feasible.
Correct.
Seems to be the intent here, and I've got no issue with it. I mean, does it seem arbitrary? A little bit, but
So because it's an objective standard, and our overarching guideline is if a recommend, a potential wireless facility follows these guidelines, then XYZ, whatever we decide, whether it comes to ARB or not, those kind of things. So, that's why I want to make this, like the last sentence here, Exhibit 2 illustrates this requirement. So, I want to suggest, and I didn't have this in the previous note, is that Exhibit 2 illustrates this recommendation. And would that be public utilities who would actually review this? For whether this recommendation is appropriate for a particular location or not? I just don't think it's like, it should be a very set
Planning
requirement.
staff.
Okay,
It's a planning requirement.
okay,
We review that exclusion zone.
okay.
Of course, the issue in the case of wooden poles, they're neighborhoods, they're not specifically chosen for areas that meet these requirements, where they are at present. So I guess the best we could say is that the utility on the wooden pole areas, which are considerable in Palo Alto here, sort of do your best.
So David, are you saying that basically if there's a wooden pole existing that's within that 50% area, that would pose a conflict? Okay, well then I think that that's one of those moments where if that's the intended location, it should come back to ARB because it's inside that 50%. That makes sense.
Do we really want to be looking at these projects to have them come back to us for specific,
I mean,
review? It's going to last forever
Right.
in that case.
I think we're not talking about placing new poles. We're saying placing wireless facilities
Right.
on.
Could be on a newer existing pole.
And the guideline says, the standards say, you cannot place it on a pole within this exclusion zone. There might be another standard that I'm not aware of that regulates the placement of street lights, but we are not talking about street lights. This is
Correct.
specifically about
Wood poles.
No,
No.
wireless
Oh, no, you're
facility
right. Thank you.
not to be in that exclusion zone.
Well, and I think that's, if I'm understanding this correctly, I don't think that they would allow for a new wireless facility with pole, right? Nothing there, and then suddenly they build a brand new one from ground up. I don't think that they would allow that to be built in the 50%, if I'm understanding this correctly. Now, to David's point, if there's an existing pole that happens to be touching the corner of some 50% mark, should that come back to us? Or because the pole's already there and they're just trying to utilize it, or should we say, the existing pole's already there, it doesn't really matter? And my argument would be that it should come to us because if that's a pole that's placed right in front of a house or a bedroom window or something, and all of a sudden they're adding this huge, well, maybe not huge, but this, device right in front of one of their bedroom windows, I feel like the residents should have the right to say that. And like, we don't want this here. Maybe go to the next pole down the street that sits between two properties. So I think that this is a good guardrail. And I think that the instance of this coming back to us is actually going to be pretty low, because most of the utility poles are typically built, between property lines. They tend to do that. Now, I can think of one around the corner from my house where it is right outside somebody's house, and if they put a utility item on there, it'd be staring right at somebody's window. So in that regard, I think they should have the opportunity to come back to us and fight the client, or not client, the homeowner should have the right to come before the board and say, I don't want this.
I think that's covered by this. Like if
So
there's
if
an
we-
existing pole in front of a house,
Mhm.
you can still not put.
Yeah. No,
That's good.
exactly. That's why I think it should stay. I think we're saying the same thing, but from two
Yeah.
different sides of it. Okay. So yeah, I want them to come back to ARB if they're inside the 50%. Perfect. And I don't think any new poles should be built in the 50%.
so this stays, and so if you meet this, it's meeting the objective standards. If for some reason, somebody wants to install something that is outside of that middle 50%. I mean, it would be in their best interest to just not do it, then have to go through ARB for it. But
Sorry, I think you flipped the way you said that. You said outside of the 50%.
oh, sorry, inside of the 50%. Yep. Mhm. And then, so I'm good with that. Let's leave that in.
Also, another question is for this example, the map we saw here, it seems like more towards the R1 zoning, but the general title here, it says the residential zone. So maybe we also want to clarify whether it is just apply for R1, R2, or also include all kinds of residential zone.
Where does it
I
start?
may need to go back to the original objective standards to see what that discussion was around, but in general, we've applied this across all residential zones and multifamily included everything, so residential zones. But I think it's also about, it says zone and not use. So there is a possibility that there's commercial zoning with residential as a grandfathered use there. So maybe that's something that the board can discuss, to change if it says zone or use.
Yeah, I would say zone is appropriate in all R1, R2, R3 zones, so all residential zones,
Zones or use.
zones. Because use is hard to kind of pinpoint a spot.
And uses change.
Right.
So it's in terms of regulation, having it in those zones, which is also consistent in terms of the character of those zones.
Thank you.
Just on that point, I mean, we review so many multi-family projects that, let's say there's a street, pole in front of one of those large buildings. Would a cell phone antenna be permissible in front of a large residential building? Question.
I guess I have a kind of a question on top of that, like, because there's clearly a, R1, R2, R3 zoning districts, but then there are CS and other zones where multifamily housing is being built for a variety of reasons. Then that goes to the question of use, right? It's CS zone with residential use.
And so as currently written, if you've got a mixed use building, for example, in a commercial zone, this is not one of the regulations that would apply. The other regulations would. But this particular one about keeping it away from the center of the property, that center 50%, really is only applying for those neighborhoods that are residentially zoned. Often those are the ones with the smaller lots. And so protecting that 50% is a higher priority.
Well, I would be concerned if I'm living in a multi-family apartment building, I'm on the third floor, and I look out of my window, and within 6 feet or 8 feet or 10 feet, I have one of these antennas. I think that's like
But reverse
that's
logic
question.
to that would be like, let's just say San Antonio, where a series of multifamily housing is getting built, right? So,
25 feet back.
yeah, so there's more distance there, that's for sure. But that if we were to apply this in residential use zones such as San Antonio, just as an example, then there would be the 50% zones of each one of those property would be excluded.
It would be, I think it would need to be a different rule. Like, I don't know off the top of my head what it would be, whether we say it can only be placed on street corners or, I don't even know what the rule would be. I wonder what other cities do.
You said like plus or minus 10 feet to either side of a property line. Right, and then you're forcing them to be as close as possible to in between the buildings.
Yeah, that could be, it could be another one. Yeah. Put it on top of, potentially roofs, but it's still proximity. Yeah, I wonder how other cities deal with that.
Staff can look into that to see how it's done. I think the way to think about this would be with all these state laws, there's just so many different zones where housing is now encouraged. So, and outside of that, I think we could maybe phrase it as a zone where residential uses are permitted, because there's a lot of places, like I mentioned before, where uses are no longer permitted, but they're grandfathered in because it was a use like 100 years ago. The
But I-
phrasing of which we may have to work through,
But understand that's basically all the zoning. in
yeah,
the city, right?
that's all the city.
And if I may, so there are 6 pages of
Mhm.
this.
And we're on page 1.
Exactly. So
All right.
And-
My recommendation is to kind of leave it in the residential zone, so there's at least a guidance on the smaller properties, where also driveways and such would be in effect. And then residential, it already says, on the next item, request for wireless facilities exception involving placement of wireless facility within residential zoning district shall prioritize facilities on expressways, arterials, major roads, basically. So I think that kind of also pushes it away from smaller residential streets. All right, I would like to move on to packet page 12. And skip the building structure setback, distance between facilities, intersection corners, and scenic routes, since those don't seem like ARB purview items. So jumping down to historic district sites and structures, and this is where we had noted the question about immediately adjacent. That was in to this presentation. Does anybody have any further questions on this, or are we good with across the street and diagonally across was that immediately adjacent definition? Move on. Thank you. Okay, now, this is a big one. The next item, underground design. We had the previous standards had this preferred option of undergrounding, but from the presentation today, sounds like this preferred option is really not feasible anyway. I would like to ask our AT&T representatives if you have a history of installing radio equipment below ground anywhere. Is this really, really never done?
That is something in my time with an AT&T that we have not done. And I've been with the company for about 17 years now.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So to the board, shall we strike this as a preferred option, or strike the whole section and just have the top mounted design as the option that's on the top of page 13?
I mean, yeah, if they're gonna just keep saying this isn't feasible, then why are we addressing it?
I wonder why this is even in here if they haven't done it for 17 years.
All right, so, all right. So if we go ahead and strike the underground design, and then move on to top of page 13, then I had this note of add this text only if underground is feasible. So the text at the top would get removed, and the secondary option no would be removed. This would be really the only option. Everybody good with that?
Remember the conversation from last time?
Mhm.
I think that because this one says radio equipment and antennas within a shroud at the top of the pole, but I understand only the antenna is at the top of the pole. The radio is on the side, on the pole itself.
Kind of dependent upon the design.
It's mixed in here.
Yeah.
It seems to me that there are alternatives that have radios in the top, and then others that have the radios only below. So
Can AT&T confirm?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
So it says the radio equipment shall be attached to the pole, and we were basically debating whether it's the antenna that's at the top or the radio equipment that's also at the top, or whether that design varies. So the antenna is always at the top, correct? Is the radio
Correct.
Pole or a steel metal light pole?
That's the question,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Is there ever a time where the radio equipment and the antenna will be separated from each other? Are they always like together?
So there's different technology. There are hybrid radio antenna units where they're actually integrated into one unit. And then there are separate where the radios are attached to an antenna via coaxial cable.
Got it.
And typically, in that case, the antenna will be at a higher elevation than the radios. We do like to try to get the radios close to that antenna because, as was mentioned, there's loss over that coaxial cable run. So the shorter the distance, the less loss there is to the signal.
Thank you very much.
Did that answer all questions?
No, actually, in that October presentation and also some of the examples here, the radio equipment, if I remember this correctly, the radio equipment needed more maintenance access, so it was wanting to be lower down the pole, above head height, but lower down in the pole versus the antenna, which is at the very top, to be top of whatever height. Is that not correct? Or can the radio be super high up on the pole?
Well, there's a balance, right? If you ask our RF engineers, they would want as minimal distance between the radios and the antennas. If you ask our operations folks that have to go out and maintain these, they'd want them lower on the pole. Either way works for us. It's just there's a trade-off between the signal loss and the ease of maintenance.
And Nishita, what's under the gray box on this text, do you know? Upper right, radio equipment and the associated antennas blank, or is there no?
I will check. Looks like there's a tail of a word just sticking out under that gray box, but
What do we want?
I'm
Does David want?
Yeah, no, I think that the radios ought to be all located somehow right next to each other, and the antenna is the separate item. And there are alternatives to the design of the assembly for the radio units that we're not discussing today. But seems to me that there are ways of organizing the radios all in one area. The
Separated
question
from the
is
antennas.
there a problem with the antennas being close by, or how does that work? In particular, if we're talking about on wood poles and they're a lot taller, that's a certain distance, and would that technically not be feasible?
I have a recommendation on the text here, on the top mounted design. Antennas shall be located within a shroud at the top of the pole. Radio equipment shall be placed at the highest possible location on the pole.
Radio should be?
Mhm.
Why is that?
To be away from visible range.
and to be as close to the antenna as possible.
With the antennas, they're typically placed at the top of the pole to attain maximum coverage. So that is what is encouraged, and that is how it's typically proposed on poles.
I mean, it sounds like the goal for both of us is the same,
Yes,
right?
but
AT&T and us both want everything to be as high as possible, so.
well, they've come up with some designs where the radios are lower in a vertical box. And I don't think we should discourage them from putting them where they're easy to maintain.
Well, I think there are a couple of questions. So like for maintenance, how often, how frequently they will need to come to the site and do the maintenance? And also I have further questions to AT&T representative. So based on your experience, so you mentioned there are two types. One is hybrid, the other is you can separate the radio and the and the antenna. So within your past experience, like what is the percentage when you have the hybrid ones and what is the percentage you have it separated? Is it like one is more significantly more than the others, or it just
They are different technologies in terms of the frequencies that are deployed. So our millimeter wave technology is typically where we do a hybrid, and that is because there's such great signal loss over that higher bandwidth. And there's also, we don't deploy that as much because because it's such a small wavelength, there's the potential for a lot of interference. It does not penetrate through materials. So while it does provide high broadband capability, it's not a very effective solution for meeting coverage objectives. And so it is different technologies. And then our low band and our mid band spectrum is where we use radios that are attached to the antennas via coaxial cable. And that'll get better propagation.
and size-wise, are the hybrid ones pretty big compared to the other ones?
It really just depends on the coverage and capacity need that is being filled. They can be larger for higher for more capacity and higher power, or smaller if it's going to have a shorter reach. The balance between higher powered radios that tend to be a little bit larger and smaller is that the less coverage you're able to get from propagation, the more facilities would be needed in order to fill the service gap.
Thank you. And for the frequency of the required maintenance, how often it would be, like once a year or maybe a couple of years, or how, like what?
The frequency and maintenance?
Uh-huh.
That does vary. It could be a couple times a year. If there's high wind or weather events, sometimes that can cause a maintenance requirement, but typically, it's maybe a few times a year.
Thank you.
So it sounds like our preference is locating the radio and the antenna together within a shroud at the top of the pole. So this is actually a good baseline. And if they don't want to do it, maybe it comes to ARB.
I think that's going to be a lot of them. So I would say we leave both options. So we can note, for a hybrid antenna and radio, then this sentence applies. If they're separate, antennas are at the top of the pole and radio equipment is as high as possible. At the highest location possible. I would want to keep both options so that every non-hybrid one should not have to come to us, because that could potentially be most of them. Nishita, can you make a note of the revised language on this? So before radio equipment, we want to note for hybrid installations. And then rest of the sentence, radio equipment, yada, yada. And then another sentence where antennas and radio equipment are installed separately.
Could you repeat that?
For antennas and radio equipment installed separately, antennas shall be enclosed within a shroud at the top of the pole.
If I may.
Yeah.
In some cases, we do have dual deployments that, like, so for instance, the sites that are in downtown Palo Alto that we originally deployed and went through the ARB process, we have the hybrid radios mounted below the luminaire arm with separate radios that are also attached to an antenna that is in a single unit enclosure at the top of the pole. So there are cases where we would have both technologies deployed on a single pole.
So you're saying that in some cases you have basically smaller radios that you would put in the enclosure at the antenna enclosure, and in what is this thing? Other situations you would use a separate location lower down for the other radios.
Correct.
Let me finish the second sentence, item here. Shall be enclosed in a shroud with, at the top of the pole, radio equipment shall be installed at the highest location possible. So Mark, wouldn't this also, the second sentence basically cover the situation, the instance that you were talking about where antennas are high up and the radio is also high up close to it?
Yeah, but for the hybrid, if we did a hybrid installation so that it is an all-in-one radio and antenna unit, typically that would need to be mounted below the top of the pole if we also had a separate antenna that connected to radios, because the coaxial cable needs to run through the pole to get to the antenna at the top. And if we mounted the hybrid radios there, it would block the coaxial cable from being able to get through to the antenna.
Okay.
There's an example in our drawings that were submitted that has what appears to be a collection of the radio units, and it doesn't indicate an antenna above it. Is it conceivable that they could be put in the same mechanism that would have radios and antennas and yet be compact with a vertical element coming out of this?
Other carriers have deployed sites where all they have are the hybrid antenna and radio units mounted to the pole. In those cases, they've either done them above the pole or below the luminaire arm. I can't speak to why that is the technology they deploy. It definitely has different coverage and capacity than, it's specifically meeting the need that they have versus, the need that AT&T may have.
Might be different, huh? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what if we edited this to say, like, remove the hybrid installation note, radio equipment, the original sentence remains, and say, alternatively, antennas are, for antennas and radios, the equipment installed separately. So that gives you both options. And I also, although other carriers are not here, I don't want it to be single, don't want to have any favoring one carrier versus another. So I want to make it,
Universal.
universal. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And also not make it so nobody can actually meet the requirements. Is everybody in agreement with the sentence in blue? All right, let's move on. On the next item, minimal shielding design, we wanted to add just clarification, all associated cabling, wiring, conduits must be fully concealed within one contiguous shroud. So no cables and conduits outside of the enclosure. Any notes on this?
Except for wood poles.
If I may, and Tasha is there as well, the dimensions may be prohibitive.
The 8 inches, are you saying that with that dimension, you cannot conceal cabling, wiring, and conduits?
Well, I am wondering about the 0.75 cubic feet. What's that for? It seems a little arbitrary. So maybe if we just say not exceeding 8 inches in width and a certain dimension and depth, and then they can run it as long as they need to.
The equipment that we used when these original standards were developed is, we don't deploy that equipment anymore. For one, it requires more locations than the current equipment allows for, and in some cases those radios are not available anymore. So yeah, 8 inches in width would prohibit just about all of the equipment that we'd be deploying today.
I mean, this is in regards to conduits, wiring, things like that. You're saying that you've got wiring and
Oh, hold
all
on.
of it. Yeah,
I'm
so
sorry. I
this
thought
is
that
cabling,
was,
wiring, conduits. So just making sure that there's no sort of loose threads on the outside of these poles, I think is the goal here. And I would also maybe add something to say, preferably, like if it's a metal pole, if they can keep them inside, that's probably even better. Or
well,
maybe-
I was looking at the radio equipment shall be enclosed within 1 or 2 sun shields not exceeding 8 inches
right.
wide nor 0.75 cubic feet in volume. That would be too restrictive to enclose our radios
The actual
along
radio
with
equipment. Yeah.
the associated equipment.
Yeah, because that's referring to radio equipment versus cables. So this is like two thoughts in one.
Yeah, and then the associated antenna shall be placed in a shroud at the top of the pole.
We've already said.
Right, and then all associated cabling that's adjacent, once it comes out of the pole, I guess is what we're trying to clarify.
Right.
That there's no loose wiring or cable or conduits that is visible outside the shroud once the cable comes or the conduit comes out of the pole in case of metal poles.
I mean, I'd say this almost feels like two thoughts that maybe we need to separate. One is radio equipment, how is it going to be shielded? And number two is how is all the cabling and wiring going to be concealed? So I'd almost take that red text, separate it and say all cabling, wiring, and conduits must be fully concealed, preferably in the pole when possible, and when outside in one contiguous shroud, something like that, keeping it simple. And then we can circle back to the radio equipment because that does feel like a separate thought.
You know, this excludes the possibility of separate radio enclosures as shown in some of the Verizon systems that are here. There's a split on that. It's an interesting idea that the radios are radial all around the pole.
Exactly. And I think that's exactly what AT&T's sort of complaint is at the moment, is saying this 8 inches wide and 0.75 cubic feet to enclose radio equipment is pretty darn restrictive.
Yes.
So I'm not sure why we have any of that in there. If we say radio equipment shall be enclosed within,
Tight as possible.
yeah, as small as possible footprint.
That's trying.
Well, if it's in a metal pole, there's no reason why it can't be coming up the pole and connecting through into the units themselves.
Right, and that's a great point. I mean, we, at the last hearing, had some design options presented on both metal poles and wood poles. And those can be both enclosures, like all radios might be, it might be preferred that you see all the radios enclosed in one shroud. And that shroud would be different in size based on if it's a metal light pole or a wood pole. And or you might want to have the option to see the radios individually shrouded and vertically stacked on the pole, in which case it's a little bit more streamlined and on one face of the pole. So those options are some of the options that AT&T has explored in terms of what we would like to know and how to propose which option would be preferred by the ARB. I think our first pass at this is that it looks better in one enclosure rather than vertically stacked, but that could be completely a subjective considered. Yeah, and we want to know in general
Yeah.
what you would prefer.
I mean, I have a preference. I don't know if other board members do. I think splitting it up looks more like what it is. The radios are within their own enclosure, each one.
Right.
And they're
Because-
arranged around the pole. I've been sort of thinking about
Oh,
this
like
an awful
we
lot.
call that like a face to face
All
on.
around, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
So
In the case of a wood pole, then we
Wood
would have it
pole.
around wood
Yeah.
pole and or a metal light pole, right?
right.
Right.
Then you'd have the issue of the cabling, which we're discussing here, is it comes up in one line on the outside of the pole and would have to distribute within the separate,
On a wood pole, it would come up and it would, on a wood pole,
comes up on the outside.
it would come up on the out, it would, yes.
So it's another one of those vertical elements that,
It's an exposed, yes,
Yeah.
it's exposed,
Mhm.
on the metal light pole, no matter what you know, if we were to do it a face to face or vertically stacked or in a box, the objective is to penetrate the pole as little as possible.
Mhm.
But these are yes, the considerations that we have. We can talk, I can
Yes.
be available.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So let's edit the radio equipment shall be enclosed within, I'm not sure if we should say 1 or 2, but smallest feasible size and not include the not to exceed in volume. Yeah, remove all of that. Thank you. Shall be enclosed in 1 or, any opinion on the 1 or 2 or not, or exclude that portion as well? Shall we just say shall be enclosed in the smallest feasible
I mean,
enclosure?
I kind of like 1 or 2 because that allows for the option that they separate it vertically. And I
Okay,
guess 1, but I don't know how
sometimes
we'd like if it was all 3 in a circle, then maybe that counts as 3 and that'd be problematic.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
they have it shown with 3
Right, so,
on our examples here.
yeah, so let's
And
exclude that,
And that doesn't mean it couldn't be 4.
right?
Well, since we're doing the objective standards here, shall we just trying to avoid the language like the smallest feasible sizes as possible?
That's the tough part, right?
Yeah,
Because-
right. Although I know we don't have the enough technical information here, like how big it should be, but at least as a for objective standard, I think there should be some kind of number, specific number listed here, although we don't know it from our side.
So if it says the smallest feasible enclosure, isn't that good enough?
Stephen?
If I may, I do believe that Board Member Chin is on the right track to kind of provide a little bit more clarity or specify kind of what the standard would be rather than avoiding some of this perhaps subjective language that would be not the intent of an objective standard to say to the extent feasible or some of that. So if we can kind of define what that might look like, define that threshold for what could be completed at the staff level. And should a project not meet that, then it would come before the architecture review board. So that's the thing to think here.
I'm looking at the wood pole example that has the front shroud with three radios stacked at like
Vertically.
vertically at almost 15 inches wide
Mhm.
and many feet
Which
long,
covers large and smaller radios.
like
And it's the wood pole, it's not too much wider than the
almost
pole
9
itself.
feet tall. If I'm seeing this correctly. The one on AT&T one, the radio is in a single Right. That one. That's a huge one versus the AT&T one on page A4 of the metal pole one is smaller, and I'm trying to get to a page with the dimensions. E7. Yeah, 85. I don't see it. Oh, there it is. It's 20 inches tall and looks like maybe 7 inches wide in this cut view. Oh, that's the antenna. Sorry, where's the radio dimension? On the drawing page A6 on the antenna, the AT&T metal pole one, on page A6, it says Ericsson radio, and it is about 8 by 8. Top view is 8 inches wide, front view is 8 inches tall, and side view is 4 inches deep. So is that not the size of a radio?
And if I may, I believe that we do have a representative from the city's attorney's office with us today, and they might provide some clarity on some of these volume standards that would apply to all of the projects.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, in these original objective standards, these top categories you're looking at were the design options that were just supposed to capture the overall appearance. So one was underground, one was cloud mounted, one was called sun shield, one is behind existing signs. But then if you keep going, there are dimension requirements, there's shrouding requirements, there's design quality standards, and those will apply to all projects regardless of design. So I want to make sure we're not duplicating those standards within the design element.
Thank you. Yeah, right where we are right now is the overall design standards, right? The WCF design standards. We crossed off the underground. We edited the top mounted, and then the minimum shield design is where we are right now. Do we have any guidance from the city on what the maximum size should be or minimum?
I would have to look at the approvals for both streetlight poles and wood utility poles to see what the sizes would be. But each project is different.
Just to point out the equipment adjustment standard, it says each instance of equipment shall not exceed 0.85 cubic feet, nor shall the total volume if the equipment and shrouding exceed 2.6 cubic feet per streetlight pole.
Where was that?
So those dimensions have been to include every size of every radio that they want to install here.
Yes, these are the standards for any project.
Why are they including, at this point, why are they including some of the radios in the antenna enclosure area and some of them below the light fixture connection?
So for the project design, I think that is dictated by the applicants and what they consider feasible for the project needs. What the city is looking at is, out of what they've presented, does it meet these total design and volume standards?
Okay, that's good enough, I think.
Just as a reference point, the smallest enclosure that we have for a streetlight solution where we can conceal both radios is 3 cubic feet. And that is significantly less cubic feet than if we were to individually shroud the radios separately. And that is essentially for one particular type of technology. If there were different radios required, it would be slightly larger than that.
Kind of following the city attorney's recommendation, I think the shrouding dimensions should kind of remain further down on this document. And here, I think we should split. So minimal, in the minimal sun shield design, I recommend saying radio equipment shall be enclosed, not saying 1 or 2, enclosed within sun shields, mounted directly to the side of the pole. Associated antennas shall be placed in a shroud at the top of the pole. So no mention of dimensions there. And then having another item, the topic being cabling, wiring and conduits on metal poles. And that's where this all associated cabling, wiring, conduit shall be fully concealed within the adjacent shroud. And that's for when cables and conduits come out of the pole. Do we want to keep the sun shields shall be attached at least 12 feet above the ground level? Okay, so that one stays.
Although one of the applications here, the sun shield is lower. I think it's only 8.5 feet
On the wood pole?
on the wood
Yeah.
pole.
Mhm.
I want to clarify that the plan sets that were provided were before these objective standards went into effect. So it's possible that the placement of the equipment might have been at different heights.
Can I ask a question? It's hard for me to read from back there, so I'm jumping to the screen. Did you guys change the text in red to one contiguous shroud? It says all associated cabling, wiring, and conduits must be fully concealed within one contiguous shroud. Is that for? That's for wood poles, or is that?
So
Is
going
that
back to, yeah, if you can keep the screen there, I'll mark
all
it up. So
associated
radio equipment shall be enclosed within sun shields.
fully covered? I'm going down to the red. All associated cabling, wiring, and conduits must be fully concealed within one contiguous shroud.
Within, this is really scribbly, within the adjacent shroud.
You're going to replace with adjacent.
Mhm.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, change that. And the title for this section would be cabling, wiring, and conduits. On metal poles. Thank you.
Could I clarify really quick? Is this specific to the minimal sun shield design only? Because we have a standard for WCF wires and cabling, packet page 39 that separates streetlight poles and wood utility poles. And I wonder if you want to add this language to that section instead, if it applies to all designs.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, if we could go down to packet page 39. at the bottom. We have a standard here called WCF wires and cabling that deals directly with this cables and shrouding. And I wonder if this is where you want to put those standards, if it will apply to all designs.
Okay, sorry, I'm confused on the packet page number because mine says 13. Um,
I mean, yeah, that makes sense. Right, so just taking that language of the cabling and wiring and put it down with this
Yep.
section here.
Perfect, thank you. Oh, perfect.
So the cabling, wiring, conduits on metal poles, that entire section in red and everything below it would move to the bottom of page 39,
Yeah.
correct?
Thank you. All right, we have no comments on the existing signage design. Anybody have any thoughts before we move on? All right. The next item is the antenna shroud dimensions. So I think this is where we're talking about maximum for streetlight poles, the maximum height shall not exceed 3 feet from the top of the streetlight pole that meets the city standards for the proposed location. Does or 5.5 feet from top mounted design. Excuse me. Do we have any thoughts or anything to add to that? No? All right. We had the question about the meters that was answered. So I'm going to move on. On the design quality, this text seemed fine. Does anybody have any thoughts? No? All right, so then we go to the equipment adjustment section. So here we wrote, when 2 or more radio equipment are installed on a pole, they may be at the same height installed around the pole or stacked on one side of the pole. I think, David, you had your preference on this. Do we want to have a overall preference or allow both options of around the pole or stacked vertically?
Well, I think when you look at the pole, something hanging on the side kind of is unsymmetrical relative to the pole. Seems like it, to me, it ought to be on the inside rather than the outside. Of course, this is a kind of preferential thought.
Inside meaning towards the sidewalk versus towards the street?
Mm-hmm. Well, towards the property, actually, versus towards the property line versus towards the street line.
Anybody else want to add to this sentence when vertically stacked? The radios are to be installed away from the, on the side away from the street, the backside of the pole.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. Nishita, would you mind adding that text?
I'm looking at the pole, driving down the street. So if it's installed on the side, I don't see it. At least it's shielded by a post. So at least 50% of the time, the post covers it. But if it's on the inside, 100% of the time I see it.
It depends upon the width of it, right? It's shielded by the pole or
To
not.
some extent, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's there. Why should you hide it? It's not going to be hidden from most of the views anyhow. If it's in the back of the pole, you won't see it so much from the street.
I think the way they typically propose to install these is parallel to the street. Like even the application we have in our package, it shows it like that. I think that's nice. So I don't see. I wouldn't require them, or I would not have a preference for having it oriented another way. I would probably have a preference against it. It's not a strong preference, but I think it looks good to me like this. This is in the third for the wood pole sheet T3.
And metal full sheet A4, AT&T one shows it on the side as well, and that's a smaller one too. I guess, a question for AT&T, does it matter, for any access or anything else, if there was a preference? Is it limiting your ability to provide service in any way?
I don't believe in terms of if it is a hybrid unit where it had an antenna, then the orientation would be dependent on where the coverage was needed. But if it's a radio unit, solely a radio unit, then the location on the pole wouldn't matter.
So in other words, if we gave a preference, but you were installing a hybrid version, then it could affect your coverage.
Correct.
Hmm.
Since nobody other than David, nobody has a strong preference, shall we just leave it as is and not give a preference? All right, thank you. All right, moving on.
Sorry, just a quick clarification. The red text added, is that
Yeah.
with the WCF design quality section or the right before the equipment adjustment where we go into street light pole and wood utility pole examples?
It was at the end of the design quality. Thank you. We are at 10:23. Let's see if we can be done by 11. All right, so on the next item, which is the equipment adjustment. For streetlight poles, equipment that cannot propagate an adequate signal within the shouting required by the standard design shall be attached to a streetlight pole at a height of 2 feet below the light mast or higher. The standard design from the staff presentation earlier, I'd like to get everyone's opinion on it because it kind of felt like a circular reference. Do we want to say by this objective standard or something if it's really referring to this objective standard? Any thoughts on this?
When it says 2 feet below the light mast, is that like the light unit? Because wouldn't we want these above the light units? Right, like in the examples? I feel like I'm reading Greek in this paragraph, to be honest. I'm like, I'm not sure what any of this is really dictating here, so I don't know why this paragraph is not landing. But I think with the examples, it pretty clearly shows if there's a light pole, that the equipment is above the light fixture, because we wouldn't want the light shining down and casting a shadow on the equipment, highlighting it, right?
I think the 2 feet below is referring to the hybrid units.
Hmm. Equipment that cannot propagate an adequate signal within the shroud required by the standard design shall be attached to the streetlight pole at a height of 2 feet below the. If it can't do that, I don't know what we're doing here. I kind of feel like scrap this whole paragraph. It doesn't make any sense to me. But that could just be my frustration talking.
Yeah, and same with the wood. There's a wood
Yeah.
pole version of the same.
Sort of like strike both of those.
Nishita, can you give us some clarification on why this paragraph exists?
Not sure.
If I could jump in, I think the intent here was the standard design is top mounted only. So if it can't fit within only top mounted, you can have a separate radio as long as that's not lower than 2 feet below the mast arm.
Is there any feasible scenario where this would actually happen?
That I'd have to ask.
AT&T looking at you.
The applicants.
This is where we have like an antenna that's mounted on top of the pole, and then hybrid radios mounted below the luminaire arm. That's our design within the downtown area.
But in theory, you would never want that. You would want the radio and the antenna to be at the same level, correct?
Well, it depends, right? The designs that we are looking to move forward with would have a radio mounted in an enclosure lower down on the pole, because then it would require much greater height if it went on top of the pole, and it might not be structurally feasible for that radio equipment to mount on top of the pole and then have the antenna on top of that.
But in
So
theory, if structurally feasible, you guys want the antenna and the radio as close together, and those would both be in the top of the pole. But if for some reason it's structurally infeasible to have all of that weight at the very tippy top of the pole, you would pull down the radio equipment, leaving the antenna at the top. Am I following that correctly?
yes.
Except
Okay.
the word structurally. I mean,
Right.
it might be for other technical reasons.
Well, he's saying structurally, so that's what I'm saying.
If I may jump in here, I think our previous, the first section of the standards where we're giving both options of if they're separate, the antennas at the top, radio is further down. If they're together, the antennas and the radios are at the top. Seem to cover the requirements, and this seems like mudding the waters in ways that is not making sense right now.
I agree.
So
Yep.
I recommend we strike this portion. Any objection from the staff on this?
I think we'll take your recommendations. If there are things that as we do the full review of these suggestions, that are of concern in terms of consistent guidelines, and clarity, we will identify those when we bring your recommendations to the ARB and to council. So I think we can go ahead and include this as part of your recommendation. If you so choose.
There is an existing example from another carrier that has they are hybrid antenna radios mounted above on the pole top. That does have extends significantly above the pole, versus if they were mounted below the luminaire arm, then there wouldn't need to be any extra height added to the pole. But that's just as a reference for the city. I could share, I think Tasha may be able to share that example that's existing if you wanted to see it, but and it could have been necessary for the coverage that that carrier was seeking to achieve too. I'm not sure, but there is an existing example of it.
Is that in the the Verizon drawings that were shared with us as an example? Is that what you're referring to? Or some other location?
It was a Verizon's Cluster 6 application.
Okay. So we asked the city to clarify this as part of kind of combing through this after we put our recommendation together. Thank you. All right, nothing on curb clearances. We going down to the wiring and cable. When I look at this again, all wires and cable shall be routed entirely underground and within the pole and attached shroud. I'm kind of going back on my recommendation earlier, and this seems maybe sufficient and don't need to add the text that we added above. Is everybody in agreement with that? We were. The wood pole section is further below. It says all wiring cabling shall be within the shroud or shall be within conduit. So wood pole section is separate. Yeah. Okay. All right, so going down to the next, oh, sorry, go ahead. Did you have some?
Within.
Con-
The wood section. The wood section says all wiring.
Your microphone is not.
Within.
And shall be within conduit.
And shall be within conduit. Or be within conduit. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so let's go to the power disconnects section. We were just clarifying to say that shall be labeled and placed in an underground vault, just in addition to just saying vault. Last section, performance.
Just one clarification on that. The power, and this was I did discuss this with staff after the last ARB meeting, but for wood utility poles, the power actually is coming already from overhead. There are no underground connections for wood utility poles.
Okay, good.
For streetlight poles, it's not an issue, but I did want to make sure that was a clarification from last time.
So in case of wood poles, is the disconnect switch mounted on the side of the pole at reach height?
Correct.
That was an example. All right. Shall we, so that's already noted here in the next item, though, shall be labeled and placed on the wood pole or in the vault near the base. So I think that's fine. All right, let's move down.
Works. Thank you.
Yeah, move down to the pole replacement. So here, where it said before the red text, existing streetlight pole proposed for WCF installation shall be replaced with a new pole. This felt like it was asking for all poles to be replaced, although it sometimes is not. So we were adding this clarification text where reuse of existing pole is not possible. Does staff have any concerns with adding this text?
The replacement of poles is reviewed by the utilities team on a case-by-case basis. And there's a very long kind of footnote here that kind of describes how that should look and appear, and they do need to confirm and run it by the different departments. So since these are standards we're setting And if we meet the standard, we wouldn't have to come in for ARB review. We could keep it as is. So would we have to phrase if they are not able to essentially use the existing poll and putting a new poll, they would come in for ARB review? Is that the intent?
No, the intent is to add this text, because without the red text, it sounds like when an existing pole is proposed for an installation, that pole shall be replaced, right? Which is not always the case. When it is required to be replaced, then yes, you have the standards of what that needs to be. But the requirement to replace is not a given, right? Whereas the text in the pole replacement sounds like you are required to replace it.
Just reading it out loud as written. An existing streetlight pole proposed for a WCF installation shall be replaced with a new pole. So that basically seems pretty darn clear that they want to put a wireless communication on it. They need to put a new pole in. Is that the goal? And if not, then the red text should be added.
Since it is case by case, I think the red text makes sense.
Thank you. And same with the wood pole. All right, now down to the very end of this section, which we time check, it's 10:36. Let's make this a relatively quick discussion. We're noting here that tier 2 and tier 3 installations that meet these objective standards need not be heard in an ARB hearing. Deviations from objective standards shall be reviewed by the ARB. Is everyone good with, if it meets the criteria as we've discussed today, we don't need to see those projects? Yeah, all right. So that's the end of our objective standards review.
I just take a moment here and say huge thank you to you and David for the ad hoc meeting. You guys clearly did a ton of work on the front end here, and it was incredibly helpful for this discussion. So I just wanted to thank you guys for that extra time and effort you guys put forward.
Thank you. And in such a short time. And also kudos to staff for preparing all these examples in such a short time.
Thank you. So going back to, all right, so the recommendation was to recommend adoption of the proposed review criteria and process by the city council. So based on the notes we made today, does the staff want us to vote on moving this forward, or do you want us to review the next version?
Yeah, we would recommend that you make a motion based on the direction provided today. We had some pretty clear language provided since Nishita was typing it up as you went along. And so making that recommendation, and then we can bring it to Planning and Transportation Commission for their review as well, to take those recommendations then to council. So yes, and a motion
Anybody
today.
want to make a motion? Me? All right, I make the motion that with the edits made today, that we recommend this revised objective standards to be forwarded to PTC and City Council for adoption.
Second on it.
Board Member Chen,
Yes.
Board Member Jojar,
Yes.
Board Member Hirsch,
Yes.
Vice Chair Rosenberg,
Yes.
Chair Adcock.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
All right, thank you. We don't have any meeting minutes to review. So last item is virtual public comments. Do we have any requests to speak from any virtual speakers?
To the chair, I have not received any requests for virtual public comment.
Thank you. Going back to our agenda.
I did want to thank you for your time I know that you put a lot of work behind this to all the board members and staff as well. So do really appreciate the work that you've done here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any board, I think I skipped through board member questions, comments, announcements. Did anybody get married? No announcements? All right, thank you. I think we shall adjourn.